Hey guys, welcome to Sonic Discovery. I am your host, David Correa. On this episode, we'll be covering new music from Jack White, Black Milk, and Sunflower Bean. Well guys, thanks for clicking play on the show. If this is your first time watching Sonic Discovery, what I do here is basically just take new music releases that have been coming out and give them a listen and let you know what I think. So hopefully through this, you're going to stumble upon something new that you might potentially fall in love with. Starting off this episode, we're going to go straight to it, to what seems to be the very divisive new album from Jack White. This is called Boarding House Reach. Now, I've been, seeing a lot of different reactions to this album. Some of them very positive, others overwhelmingly negative. And, just hearing, the songs that came out before the album release, I didn't really know what to think. There was really nothing that, blew me away, but you could definitely tell that Jack was going for something very different here. Now, Jack White, he's had a long career with the White Stripes and all the other bands that he's formed, the Raconteurs. Now he has his own label, Third Man Records, and, he's released 2 albums so far. Previous to this, he released Blunderbuss and Lazaretto. And on Blunderbuss, it really seemed like a solo album, still very much keeping the blues and garage rock influence of the White Stripes, but, mellowing out a bit too, bringing in some folk, some country, and really enjoyed that album. Lazaretto, I felt that, it was more of the same, not as memorable. So when it comes to album number 3, he could have just gone that route and given us something that was going to be around the same sound, but just a little duller. And I'm glad that that's not what he did. He decided to throw all that away and do something incredibly different. So I have to warn you guys right now, if you like Jack White and you like Jack White for sounding like Jack White, then you might potentially hate this album. Now, if you're open to listening to him experiment a lot and try new things, there's definitely going to be moments on here that are going to be very rewarding. First, we're going to start off with the tracks that I thought were the best executed. And we're going to start up at the top with Connected by Love. Now, this is one of the singles released. I believe it's the leading single. And, it took a while for it to grow on me. Because at first, it sounded very boring. It's slower, it's sluggish. It's not until the second half where it gets a lot more exciting. That's where we get, guitar solos, organ, congas, and Jack White doing his little vocal wailing, which you hear a lot throughout this album. And also a wall of background vocals of these ladies that you hear throughout the album as well. On here, he's, wanting his lover to take his pain away, and they should know how to do it because they have that bond, that connection through their love. Corporation is one that has a lot of experimentation throughout. This has more of like a funky vibe to it. There's a lot of electric piano and congas. There's actually some conga solos going on. And the first section here just has a lot of these vocal yelps that he gives. And on the rest, he's getting his listeners to join him in all these different ventures that he wants to do. One of them being forming a corporation. Over and Over and Over is another single from the album. And this is one that people of, fans of his older sound are going to connect to the most. Because this is probably the most rock of the songs on this album. The background vocals sound very ominous, and the different guitar effects that he does on the track reminded me a lot of what Tom Morello would do with Rage Against the Machine. Everything You've Ever Learned starts off with Jack kind of going off all these different things. If you want to learn more, then go ahead and do it. Basically, telling people to stop being your own obstacle. Just do what you want to do. And the second half here gets very explosive with the music and the rest of the band just really gelling. That was probably one of my favorite moments on this record. Respect Commander is one of my favorites on this album. This first starts off sounding like Planet Rock by Afrika Bambaataa, but if it was being performed by a live band. Then in the second half, it switches up into a slower blues rock sound, and here there's still a lot of experimentation, a lot of manipulation going on with sound, and the guitar solo we get on here is by far the craziest on the album. What's Done Is Done is a country-like duet with Esther Rose. What's interesting about this track is that, although it has that country sound, the production, the drum beat, it sounds very much influenced by hip-hop, with the louder bass drum and an occasional little hi-hat that comes in. But eventually, goes more into the country route when it's joined by the organ and the live drums. Humoresque is the closer of the album, and this starts off with a very gentle sound that incorporates piano and guitar, but later on gets very jazzy, and I love the way this thing closes. What's interesting about this one too is that the lyrics were actually written by Al Capone while he was in prison, and the original music was written by Anton Leopold Dvorak. Aside from all those tracks I did enjoy, there were a lot of moments though where the experimentation didn't quite work so well. Why Walk a Dog is a slower track earlier in the album, and this has this distorted guitar solo that sounds like it's being filtered through Skrillex. It's weird. It sounds like dubstep. It's twisted and electronic, and maybe a little off-putting to some fans. Hypermisophoniac is a song that experiments a lot with weird sounds, and this one is just a little too bizarre for me. Ice Station Zebra is another very experimental track where you hear influences from funk and hip-hop as he's talking about the art of creation, or at least I think he is. And lastly, we have Get in the Mineshaft, which is a real bizarre track. His voice here is completely manipulated as we get these like fuzzy synthy bass lines. You can basically think of this as like electro-funk gone wrong. Overall, despite all the weird experimentation that didn't quite work all the time, I was really happy that Jack decided to basically take a huge left turn into a whole different direction. He's probably going to alienate a lot of his fans, but I'd rather an artist try something very different instead of just becoming stagnant with the same sound throughout. So I ended up giving this album a 7 out of 10. So if you're willing, go ahead and follow Jack down the rabbit hole, and you just may be surprised at the stuff you'll like from this. Up next, we have the newest release from rapper-producer Black Milk. This is called Fever. Now, Black Milk has released a lot of different material. This is actually his 7th album, but he's also released different EPs and countless different collaborative albums, and he's worked with a lot of different artists. I'm really unfamiliar with this artist, but I'm glad that I stumbled upon him because I am a big fan of this album. I love when hip-hop is presented to me with live-sounding production, and that's what we get on this album. And also, I was a pretty big fan of his flow and what he has to say. Nothing irks me more than rappers that have nothing to say. And this guy, he talks a lot about what is socially going on in the world, and in his community. The opening track, Unveil, has a spacey yet very lively production where the drums are found a little louder in the mix. Here he talks about trying to find meaning through the struggle of life. But I Can Be has a steady hip-hop beat, but still very spacey production with floating background vocals everywhere as he's trying to give advice on different things, but is also admitting that he could possibly be wrong. I love the live production sound on the next track, Two Would Try, and also the horns that lead us into the hook. Here he's talking about two people that are trying to give their budding romance a chance. Laugh Now, Cry Later gives us trippy production that is led in by a liquidy sounding bass line, and later on he adds in more percussion and a guitar that does this little noodling to end the track. On here, he talks about those people that like to talk about change but really don't act on it. True Lies has a progression line that's a little odd, as it's more dominated by the guitar. On here, he's talking about, everything that we're taught is really just a big lie. There's a great groove to the next track, Drown, and a lot of really cool things going on in the production too, as he talks about the injustice going on in the world and how it just seems that, certain people are just living a vicious cycle that they can't seem to get out of. He also talks about cops and how about those good ones that, they see things happen and they just stay shut. They don't speak out against the ones doing the bad. Faux Friends is a funkier track that tells two different stories of friends that let money and love get in between them. I love the closing of this track where we hear a lady say that she hopes that one day they'll be able to live instead of just surviving. Will Remain has a steady beat and a free-flowing bass line that really makes me wonder, is that Thundercat? And on the closing track, You Like to Risk It, Things Will Never Be, we get a much smoother production as it sounds like Drake's on this hook, as he's saying that he doesn't really need all the hype because he's the real deal. Overall, I was a really big fan of this album. I love the live sounding production and his overall message throughout. This is going to get a score of an 8.5 out of 10 from me. Probably one of the best hip-hop releases that I've heard this year. In closing out the episode, we'll be talking about the second release from the New York indie band Sunflower Bean. This is called 22 in Blue. Now, this is another band that I'm not familiar with at all. I did catch a couple of songs which I thought were pretty interesting. And this band is comprised of Nick Kivlin, who is a lead guitarist and provides vocals, Jacob Faber, who does drums, and Julia Cumming, that is the bassist and lead vocalist. And what I liked about this band is that, yes, they're an indie band, so they have a familiar sound, but they are also very influenced by classic rock. And that influence can definitely be heard on the opening track, Burn It, which brings in that classic rock sound, but also has a catchy pop sheen. Here they're talking about disliking change, and when it gets to a point to where it's so unrecognizable. You can use this, for people, but on this specific track, they're talking about New York City. I Was a Fool has a dreamy-like quality to the sound, as both singers are on here providing their own vibe, and it's an overall sad song as they're talking about lost love. I do like the breeziness and the catchiness of the next track, 22, and also was a fan of the strings that are brought into the song. On here, she's talking about self-identity. Crisis Fest is one that has more of a classic rock sound And you can really hear this on the guitar riff that leads into the chorus. Here they're talking about the younger generation and how sometimes they feel like they're not being heard, but in fact, they hold all the power. Puppet Strings is another one that had more of a classic rock sound and actually has a really nice solo towards the end. And this song deals with heartache as they give us the line, "Gave you my heart and you walked away." Only a Moment had a melancholy vibe that reminded me a lot of Lana Del Rey as they're trying to give a friend in need some encouragement. Human 4 is one that had a harder edge on the album as they're talking about not really needing your religion or your conformity because to them, music is their salvation. Any Way You Like is a mellower track that had some nice dreaminess going on with the layered vocals as they're talking about the things you do for those that you love. Sinking Sand gives us more of that classic rock sound again as they're talking about those people that are just really tricked into thinking anything. Nick's vocals on here kind of gave me like a Velvet Underground vibe. And the album comes to a close on the cheery track Oh No Bye Bye, which talks about no matter what happens, they at least have each other. And I really like the contrast between both singers on this song. Overall, I was happy with this release. It's not anything that's revolutionary, but they have a catchy sound. I like the contrast between both singers and more of a classic rock influence. This is going to get a score of a 7 out of 10 from me. So, if you like a nice catchy indie rock album with more of a classic rock vibe, then I recommend you go check this out. Well guys, that does it for the show. If you like my reviews, make sure to leave a comment down there at the bottom. And if you have anything that you want me to check out or review, make sure to leave that down there as well. And while you're there, feel free, hit the like button or subscribe and you'll know what's on the next one. But for now, it's time to say later.